The new podcast, In the Shadow of Princeton, starts as the matriarch of a prominent Princeton family is found stabbed to death in her locked basement. Investigators look from a serial attacker to her family to Princeton University students. One hot-blooded investigator sees a conspiracy. Is he way off base, or does privilege let you get away with murder? In the Shadow of Princeton is available wherever you get podcasts, or you can binge it ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
It's the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. Welcome back, everybody, to the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. I'm Dan Long, and I'm pleased to be joined by our 6 NJ.com beat writers to talk about everything related to the gridiron action here in the Garden State. On this week's episode, we'll be breaking down some of our biggest games of the week from the previous week. We'll have our look at some of the final notes from Week 7 action in New Jersey football. And we're coming up on cutoff week for the public schools playoff sections. So we'll be taking a look at that as well as having an outlook on the playoffs. And we'll finally break down the NJIC championship game between Butler and Glen, as well as previewing a couple of big non-public matchups featuring Bergen Catholic and St. Joseph Regional and DePaul Catholic and Delbarton. So we jump right into the huddle here to recap one of our games of the week from a week ago. Bergen Catholic taking on Delbarton in a rematch of the 2023 non-public A state final. And this time around, just like last time, Bergen Catholic emerged as the victors and now stretch their consecutive win streak against New Jersey competition to 21 straight games. And I bring in Ryan Patty to talk a bit about the Crusaders and what makes this Crusader team so resilient this year, Ryan, that they're getting every team's best shot, but they're still finding a way to finish off with wins.
Yeah, there's two things that I look at with this Bergen team and how they keep winning. But I want to start by saying that this was probably the best game of the season for Dominic Campanelli. We know how good Najee Calhoun and Dante Kane are, and they're huge for Bergen because, they provide them with such a presence in the ground game where they don't need the passing game to go ballistic every week to win. But on Saturday, they kind of needed that passing game. And yes, Calhoun and Kane combined for 172 yards and 3 touchdowns, but this was Campanelli's best game, and they needed a spark. When they were in the middle of that second quarter, it was 3-0, and he delivered that spark. He had 242 yards and 3 scores. He completed 15 of his 23 passes. All 3 of those touchdowns were long touchdowns. Quincy Porter scored. Anthony Perotti scored, and they used one of those packages that they have for Naeem Parrish. And obviously he's committed to Minnesota to play DB, but he's kind of their break glass in case of emergency guy. And we've seen him score from long distance, and that's what he did on Saturday. But, the first thing that I attribute Bergen's will to win from is, the fact that they're so experienced. They dominated non-public A last year with this same cast of kids, with the exception of a couple. You look at Kaj Sanders, he graduated, a couple of the stars on the O-line, and then a couple of the kids in the front 7. But this team also thrives so well with their backs against the wall. They love being picked against. They love being rooted against. They love being counted out because no matter what happens, they believe that they're going to get through to the other side. That's the culture that Vito Campanelli's built. And this run that they're on is incredible because they love that target on their back.
You could see throughout the course of a sideline in a Bergen Catholic games, people even wearing those Bergen Catholic versus everybody t-shirts. And that's been that mantra that they've rallied around. They took a 7-6 lead at halftime and then exploded in the second half. And Luis Torres in that second half, Delbarton, they really could not find a way to slow down BC. Kind of the same problems that they had defensively that was shown a couple weeks prior against Pope John started to rear its head. Is that worrisome for Delbarton and the Green Wave's chances later on in the postseason?
I think it is. I mean, I think credit to Delbarton and kind of the first half and kind of Coach Brian Bowers and that defense kind of keeping Bergen at bay. I had Bergen Catholic. Bergen Catholic only had 2 first downs in the first half. And even to begin the second half, that first drive for Bergen kind of stalled as well. And you said the word exploded. I mean, the thing about Bergen Catholic kind of probably should scare everybody. It's just their explosiveness on that side of the ball. And what Delbarton was able to do in the first half is they were kind of able to kind of limit those explosive plays But then Bergen, of course, kind of Vito Campanelli told me after the game that Dom actually told him, was like, hey, I think we should kind of run these 8 plays that I feel are going to have some success. Because Vito said, I mean, you watched it, their offense, he said, was stuck kind of in neutral that entire first half, and kind of they were able to get those big explosive plays. Naeem Parrish, like Ryan mentioned, kind of had a nice one-handed grab where he tipped the ball to himself to kind of open the floodgates. The running game got going. Najee Calhoun got 2 rushing touchdowns. David Matesic had the interception. But there are some things kind of for Delbarton they're going to have to clean up defensively, and it doesn't get any easier. And I will touch on later on with the DePaul game this week. It's going to go for the division title. I mean, the secondary kind of, I mean, it's hard to prepare and kind of match up against Bergen Catholic's wide receivers. It's always tough, and kind of guys like Delbarton, they got good corners in Lucas Cardinale and Troy Bailey, and their safeties Will Trafford and Chas Guzmano, but kind of containing those explosive plays is going to be key for Delbarton. I mean, against Pope John, you were there as well. Tylee Kill is one of the most explosive running backs in the state. Bergen Catholic's offense can just score at any time. So there are some things that Delbarton is going to have to clean up kind of moving forward. And I know defense coordinator Matt Liotti and head coach Brian Bowers are going to have to get those things cleaned up, because once you get to the playoffs, I mean, you're most likely going to, there's a chance you see Bergen Catholic again potentially in the semifinal. And if you want to beat this Bergen Catholic team, you're going to have to limit those explosive plays when you're on defense against that offense.
And Luis, you were there on Saturday in Morristown. When Bergen Catholic was sputtering a bit on offense, they could always rely on their defense. They made countless number of stops in the first half alone on 4th down, especially inside the red zone, that were missed opportunities for Delbarton. I don't know if, even at this point, after 3 years of dominance, if Bergen Catholic's defense is paid enough credit. They're the side that has been incredibly consistent. And if this offense becomes explosive, then it's going to be really tough for the opponents to try to take down the Crusaders this year.
100%. And Delbarton didn't capitalize on those opportunities in the first half. They got inside the 10-yard line twice and only came away with 6 points, 2 field goals by Will Kramer. Kind of was a story there for Delbarton. But even, I mean, Bergen Catholic's also dealing with some injuries as well. And that defense, I mean, that defensive line, in my opinion, is the best in the state. I mean, you saw freshman Jackson Vaughn also makes have another huge game. And kind of, he's one of those guys that's kind of next in line for them. There, and I mentioned David Matesic's interception kind of helped swing the momentum in that game in the third quarter, kind of get that Bergen Catholic team going. I mean, their secondary's phenomenal with Jordan Thomas, Naeem Parrish. That defensive line is elite. So that defense can keep playing like they have been all year. I mean, good luck to the rest of the teams in the state if that offense can kind of find their way and kind of find their footing for 48 minutes.
So that was a matchup in non-public A. Well, we had another big game that factors into non-public B from last week, and we bring in Joe Zadalis to talk about Red Bank Catholic rebounding in a huge way with a win at home at Count Basie Field against Paramus Catholic.
You want to talk about a team that needed that. That was Red Bank Catholic. I mean, 42-14 over a top 20 team, which this loss ultimately led to Paramus Catholic leaving the NJ.com top 20. I think it was, I'm sure Red Bank Catholic fans are hoping that this is the catapult that gets them ready for the playoffs. And no, there aren't many teams that have been better in the state tournament than RBC. Under Mike Lang in 3 years, RBC is 7-1 in the tournament. Now, they did some things better this week. I think the biggest change was the way that their defense played. The week prior, in a 26-11 loss to Rumson, the RBC front was beaten up by the Rumson offensive line, but, they were stout on Friday night. I understand this, Dan, is a little bit of an asterisk game because Paramus Catholic is really beat up. They played without their quarterback. They played without their top running back. But again, RBC did what it had to do. It got 201 yards and 4 touchdowns out of quarterback Frankie Williams. They still didn't run the ball real well, only 79 yards. But I think all the signs were positive as we head for the state tournament for RBC.
And Kevin Minnick, there was another team down south who continues to roll its way past top 20 teams with a second straight upset victory. Who is that team, and who is that team that's really scaring the who's who in the South?
Dan, we talked about it last week. Rancocas Valley right now is playing as well as probably just about any team in Group 5. For the second week in a row, like you said, they knock off a top 20 team. This time it's St. Augustine. The Red Devils played one of the best second halves of defense I've seen all season. They limited St. Augustine to 3 yards in the second half, and trailing 14-10 at the break. They made the necessary adjustments. Garrett Lucas did an outstanding job, and his staff, of figuring out what exactly they needed to do to not only limit St. Augustine offensively, but to put some points on the board themselves. So tremendous job. Defensively, David Aganola, he had 10 tackles, including 2 huge sacks, including a strip sack that set up the lone touchdown that RV needed to finally go ahead in the second half. And then David Rivers-King and Aiden Kitts, 11 tackles apiece, 2 really solid defensive efforts by those guys, like I said, especially in the second half. The thing that really surprised me is just the fact that they were able to limit St. Augustine to those 3 yards. St. Augustine has had some problems scoring points, and basically their offense has kind of turned almost one-dimensional in that they're just running the football. They started out in a Wildcat to open the game, and I don't know how many plays they ran in a row out of the Wildcat before they finally tossed the ball. The 2 touchdowns that they did score were out of the Wildcat and were passes, but in the second half, they just could not get anything going. And obviously, I think RV deserves a ton of credit for that. And, RV is a team that's coming on strong at the right time. Coaches want their teams to peak right before the playoffs. And RV is playing really well right now, and I don't know if they've peaked at all.
So after taking a look at some of the games of the week in Week 7, let's empty out the notebook and see what our reporters have to talk about with the rest of what transpired last week in New Jersey high school football. We'll bring back Joe Zadalis. And Joe, a couple of big games down the shore last week that started off with a win in overtime for Pinelands.
I thought that was one of the bigger games of the week, Dan, simply for this reason. It was the 3rd time Pinelands let a lead slip away in the final minute of a game, and they had lost the previous 2, and they really needed to come back in this one. It was a huge night for senior running back Jamin Parkinson, 26 carries, 234 yards, 3 touchdowns, including the 25-yard run that gave him a 26-20 victory. It was a big night for Parkinson. He went over 1,100 yards rushing for the season and 3,000 yards in what has been a really wonderful career for him down in Tuckerton. The other game I thought that I'm keeping an eye on this week is the Middletown North Freehold Township game. Middletown North is attempting to win its first division championship since 1983, which seems unfathomable to me, but it's been that long. The Lions are 6-0. They've been stellar on both sides of the ball, but they're coming up against a Freehold Township team that also has a chance to win a division title. We know what Freehold Township is going to do. They're going to throw the ball all over the yard. I think for Middletown North, the key is going to be to run the ball, get time off the clock, and then sit back and play good defense. So those are the 2 items that really caught my eye heading into this week, Dan.
Bringing on to the show for the first time, Mike Kinney. And Mike, well, there's a guy that I had the pleasure of broadcasting and covering earlier this season who made a little record happen at Cedar Grove. That's the outstanding quarterback, Stephen Paradiso, and he is putting up video game numbers throughout his illustrious career for the Panthers.
Hey, Dan, that's a great way of putting it. Exactly right. Since he broke onto the scene as a freshman, really, and played a game in a win, which really set a trend for he at quarterback for Cedar Grove, because this guy, when he plays, Cedar Grove wins. He's been a 3-year starter now, and Cedar Grove was 25-5 with Paradiso in the starting lineup. You win that many games, things are going to happen. And it's funny, that's what Steve said after the game. He's taking very little credit for all the great, crazy number he's putting up. He's thanking his line, he's thanking his receivers, and they certainly all due respect to those guys. But Paradiso is a special kind of quarterback. He's a kid who can throw with great accuracy. He's a kid who reads his defense as well, and he can throw it over the top as well. So he's very dangerous. And when he tucks in and runs, he's a dangerous guy. But it was all about passing last week for Central. Hit a couple key milestones in that win over Central. He surpassed 6,000 career passing yards, which is incredible in itself. And he threw his 75th touchdown pass, which set a school record. Joe Slattery, who was an outstanding quarterback for Cedar Grove he graduated 10 years ago. He had held the record. So Paradiso broke that record this week. And, hats off to him. He's still got games to play, and he's already over 6,000 yards passing and 75 touchdown passes. So exciting stuff.
And other notes that you can think of from this past week of football in week 7?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I cover both the Big Central Conference but I also cover Essex County, which anyone would know if they know Essex County. I was just talking about Cedar Grove. I'm going to talk about another quarterback from Essex County before I hit on a Big Central note. That's West Orange. Charlie Lamort from West Orange he's been having a fabulous season. Transferred from Don Bosco, played half the season last year. West Orange was a different team when he was in the lineup. And with him at quarterback this year for the first 8 games, West Orange is 6-2. They played a very tough game, a very tough loss to Passaic Tech early in the season. And they have played Phillipsburg better than anybody but Ridge this year, which is the only team that beat Peaburg. They lost to Peaburg 21-14 with Lamort in the lineup a couple weeks ago, and he got injured in the East Orange game, fractured an elbow. He's out for the season, sad to say. Darnell Grant confirmed that. So West Orange is going to be without him, and that means the running game is going to have to step up with Farad Green and Chris Barino. And it's a big test now for Brandon LaBarca. The junior, he's played a little bit. He finished the East Orange game. He's the backup quarterback to Lamort, so it's going to be up to him to engineer this team. Now, it's not the only team. West Orange is not just about the quarterbacking of Charlie Lamort. They've been playing very good defense, and they're a pretty sound team overall offensively. But it's up to La Banca. Lamort in Spanish means basically the death. And that's exactly what he had been to most opponents. La Banca in Spanish basically means the boat. Time for Mr. La Banca to help keep this thing afloat. So see what he can do. And over in the Big Central, great thing. JP Stevens is on a rebound season. They've been playing much better than they have in years under second-year coach Jason George. This is the team that came into the season with a 42-game losing streak, biggest in the state. They won the first game of the season to crack that, and they won again this past week against Roselle Park. So they're now 2-5. Marquise Webb at quarterback, Lamar Rayford at running back, Quadir Johnson at running back. These are seniors who stuck it out. Through all the tough times, they continue to come to practice, continue to work hard, and now they've got a couple wins under the belt. They're going to try for number 3, and it's a very reasonable opportunity to get number 3 against Roselle this week. So it's good to see a team like that kind of bouncing back and feeling good about itself.
We welcome Bill Evans onto the podcast for the first time here today. And Bill, Delsea goes back to what works for them, and that's going to be hopefully paying dividends for them as they try to win home another championship this season.
Well, we talked a little bit last week about Delsea and how they needed a win against Williamstown last year. They were Group 3 state champs, a year ago, and needed that win to get the second win they needed to get into the playoffs. But they did it in a way that maybe not a lot of people expected, that they'd made a lot of changes this year. Jason Volpe had taken over for Sal Marquez, who had retired after 31 years. They'd put in a kind of a spread offense, transitioning away from the wing T, which they'd run pretty much since the program started in 1960, with the exception of a couple of years. And there was a lot of changes. They graduated a lot of players. Volpe had been the offensive coordinator at Vineland when Isaiah Pacheco, now with the Chiefs, was there and had some success with it there. But just, they were 1-5, needed a spark. So they kind of went back to the wing T this week. Jimmy Reardon, who was the quarterback a couple of years ago when they went to the state final, had been dealing with some injuries, but he was now healthy enough to go back to quarterback. They put Dan Russo, who had been playing a lot of quarterback, back at fullback, where he was, second team All-State a year ago, and everything kind of clicked for them. They beat Williamstown 35-6. The only touchdown they gave up was on the last play. Russo ran for 100 yards and a touchdown. Both of their wingbacks scored. Reardon threw a touchdown pass. They also brought Marquez back as to help in a little more of a prominent role. He was back up on top of the press box calling plays, as he has been for the most of the last few years. with Volpe down on the field. And Jonathan Harris, who had left the team after the first scrimmage, he was a guy that anybody that watched the Group 3 state final on NJ.com last year, very disruptive defensive lineman, also played tight end. He came back to the team after dealing with some injuries and focusing mostly on track, which is his better sport. It all clicked for them this week, and now they play Mainland this week, their final game going into the playoffs. They are 15th in the power ranking, so they still have to kind of clinch that spot. But it looks somewhat secure, based on the points. And they're a team that if they're going to be 13, 14, again, now with some of these changes, with Sal coming back, with some of these players back in roles that, that they were in when they went to state finals the last few years, it could be a very dangerous seed. And then we'll see what happens after this and whether they kind of continue in future years, with the wing T and going forward. But definitely over the next few weeks, they're going to be a very interesting team.
And Luis Torres, in your notes from week 7, you've been covering Mendham running wild this season, and they ran their way to a title this past week.
Yeah, Dan, one of the biggest stories I think of in kind of the county so far this year is kind of the success that West Morris Mendham has had kind of this year. I mean, like you mentioned, they kind of run wild this year. I mean, they run that triple option. I mean, they rushed for 2,900 yards this year, which I think leads the state. I don't think anybody's they're run for that many yards this year. And that's kind of a credit to kind of head coach Ethan Jaros. I mean, they beat Montville 28-0. It's their first division title in 20 years. I mean, I was in middle school last time they won a division title. And this year, I mean, I was looking at their stats earlier. They're actually 94% run this year, kind of in terms of the rushing attempts compared to the passing attempts. I mean, I covered them a couple of weeks ago against Chatham, and they attempted one pass, and I was surprised they attempted that many because they're just so run heavy. And kind of those guys, Kevin King, Cole Capuzzi, kind of their fullback and kind of the running backs have been great this year. I mean, and this is also the first time they're not 7-1. I mean, they've won 7 consecutive games. Their only loss this year was kind of in week 0 to West Morris Central, which is kind of their sister school, and that sister school rivalry. And West Morris is now kind of in our top 20, cracking in number 20. But this is also Mendham's first time winning 7 games in a season since 2008. So that's a credit to those guys, that senior class, which actually, when they played freshman football, they actually went undefeated during their freshman season. So kind of this is a product of kind of the years that they've kind of built into that program, kind of the job that Ethan Jaros is doing. Kind of he credits the players and kind of what kind of buying into him. He's in his 4th year there. So he's kind of seen that program and those kids grow, and they're having success right now. And then got one more game against Randolph this week before they kind of go into the playoffs.
So now we shift from last week in week 7, and this is a big one. It's the cutoff week for the public schools in New Jersey, and this means it's time for our roundtable discussion with our 6 NJ.com football beat writers, and we will kick things off with Luis Torres. What games are you looking forward to this week that will impact the seedings in the upcoming public school postseason?
I'm going to go out west a little bit and go to Sussex County and 2 North 1 teams kind of vying for a playoff spot, and that's a Waukegan Valley going against Lenape Valley. Both those teams, Lenape Valley is actually 14th in the power rankings, and Waukegan Valley is 1 spot behind them at 15th in the power rankings. So essentially, this game is a win and you're in for both those programs and both of those teams. And if you lose that game, you're going to need a little bit of help to kind of also clinch a playoff berth. So that's a big one, and kind of it's going to be an interesting matchup. Of course, Lenape Valley with Coach Wade Pickett, who took over for the legend Don Smolin, who won a whole bunch of games, a whole bunch of state titles there at Lenape Valley. Kind of Wade Pickett has kind of kept that wing T going, and they had a huge win last week. Kevin Catucci, I think, ran for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. So Waukegan Valley is going to have to kind of contain that running game, and kind of on the other side, Lenape Valley is going to have to kind of deal with quarterback Zach Clark, and for Waukegan Valley and Coach Jim Hamill there in his first season coaching the Rangers has done a heck of a job. They kind of split the division title last week. So it's going to be an interesting matchup in contrasting styles. So that's essentially a win and get in for both those Sussex County programs.
Ryan, Patty, what game is catching your interest here when it comes to seeding implications?
Yeah, Dan, the game I'm looking at is now number 15 Oltapan visiting Pascack Valley. And not only does this game have a chance to be a great game because of how well Pascack Valley's looked of late, but this has major postseason implications. And spoiler, I do think Oltapan wins this game. I think it's going to be a very, very good game because, Pascagoula Valley's beaten Rancocas Valley this year, and they have a number of really good wins on their resume. But the implications here are fascinating because in North 3, Old Tapan's number 1, West Essex is number 2, and Pascagoula Valley's number 3. And for Old Tapan to get the 1 seed, they just have to win because they have a head-to-head win over West Essex. And, even if West Essex gets what would be a very quality win over Morris Knowles, who's now number 18 in our top 20, it wouldn't matter because of the head-to-head tiebreaker. And I'm not even sure that it would matter anyway if there wasn't a tiebreaker, because I think the math would have them just short in power points and OSI. For West Essex to get the 1 seed, they would need that win over Morris Knowles, and then they would need a Pascagoula Valley win, because the Pascagoula Valley win would break up that head-to-head against Old Tapan and send Old Tapan to number 3, and Pascagoula Valley would be sandwiched between them. For Pascagoula Valley, they need a win and a West Essex loss, and that would give them the 1 seed. I don't have the math on this one, but a loss could be damaging for PV because West Morris is right there, 1 UPR behind them. So they could pick up some points with a win over Mount Olive and creep up on Pascagoula Valley and potentially leapfrog them. So if PV falls to number 4 in the super section, that would mean they would draw Old Tapan in a sectional final instead of a group semifinal. So I don't know if you want to face Old Tapan a round earlier, because right now they're the consensus, number 1 in group 3, throughout the state. So, all 4 of these teams are really good: Old Tapan, Pascagoula Valley, West Morris, and West Essex. But this game against between Old Tapan and Pascagoula Valley has a lot at stake in this super section.
Kevin Minnick, what games have caught your focus here in this cutoff week?
Well, Dan, I'm digging in the South 1, and there's actually 2 games I'm looking at. The first game was Kipp Cooper Norcross, a program that's only in its 3rd season of existence. They have an opportunity to get into the playoffs for the first time. They're going to take on Bishop Eustace on Saturday, and it's going to be a difficult game for them, a tough test for them. But a victory would give them quite a good number of power points, because Eustace has played pretty well this season. So, this could be the year that the Kipp kind of becomes a playoff team, and we kind of really start to take notice of them. And the other game is also in South 1, and that's Woodbury and Shalleck, because this game, Shalleck is number 5 right now in the power rankings. Woodstown and Glassboro are the top 2 teams, and they'll play each other this week, and the winner will clearly get the number 1 seed, and the loser will likely stay at number 2. But then you're looking at Paulsboro, Shore, and Shalleck. And if Shalleck can knock off Woodbury, there's a possibility that they will not only jump Shore, but they would then jump Paulsboro based on a head-to-head matchup that they've had with them this season. So when it comes down to it, Shalleck, while firmly in the playoffs, can really make a dent in their seeding. Right now the Cougars are playing pretty well, but they're in control of their destiny, whether they want to move up a little bit, or they're going to probably stay in the same 5-6 type of area. But, a big game for Shalleck. Shalleck had an awesome season last year. They've continued to play very well this year. And, obviously playing at home against Woodbury is a plus for them. And the opportunity to make a significant leap just adds to the excitement of the ball game.
Bill Evans, cutoff week, playoff seedings really being decided. What's the game that's really caught your attention?
I'm looking at Cherry Hill East at Bridgeton. First of all, that this has division title implications. They're both in the WJFL Memorial. They're both 4-0, so the winner's going to win this division. And for a couple teams that have struggled quite a bit over the last decade, that's going to be a big deal for one of them. Bridgeton is now 18th, despite a 6-2 record. And they're going to get some power points regardless, facing a 7-0 Cherry Hill East team. But they might need to win to get in. And I would think can't guarantee anything based on what other teams do. But a win over Cherry Hill East would probably vault them into the tournament, I believe. East is sitting at 11, and again, a win. I think they're in regardless. They're definitely in if they win because they'll be undefeated. But then also beating a 6-win Bridgeton team, also which is also in Group 5 like they are, I think could move them up a couple spots. And I saw this team a couple weeks ago, and they're legit. For a team that has not been in the playoffs since 2006, I think if they get the right matchup, they could do something when they're in there, and when in a game like this, they could maybe move them up a couple spots and get them a better matchup would be very helpful. So I think this game has a lot of implications for the division, first of all, but also for the playoffs for both of these teams.
Joseph Dallas, what game are you looking at in the short conference for this cutoff week?
Dan, I have my eye on the Red Bank Regional at Matawan game on Friday night. Red Bank is 4-3. It's won 2 of its last 3. And when Shane Fallon came to Red Bank, everyone expected him to do the same thing that he did at Rumson. For those who don't know or remember, Shane Fallon was the architect of that juggernaut that is now Rumson-Fair. And it just hasn't had the same success or consistency yet. I mean, he's gone 4-7, 7-4, 3-7, and now he's 4-3. This is a big game for Red Bank against the dangerous Matawan team. Matawan's only 2-5, but most people would admit that Matawan has probably as much talent as anybody in Monmouth County, with a great, with a 3-year starter at quarterback, an outstanding tailback, but they've struggled under first-year coach Matt Walsh. Now, I think Red Bank needs a win to get in, but this South 3 bracket is going to be crazy. I mean, Princeton, if it wins, we project it being in. Steinert has rival Nottingham in the annual Battle of Cooser Road. Long Branch, which only has 1 win at this point, could sneak in if it upsets 4-3 Marlboro. So, Red Bank can't count on anybody else. It has to go out and win a game against Matawan, a team that is going nowhere, but can really be a spoiler in South 3.
And Mike Kinney, I know that you have your eyes on a couple of big North 5 games that could be of interest and impact when it comes to the seedings in this last week.
Yeah, Dan, that's exactly right. One of the games is a Union County Conference, 2 Union County Conference teams, Linden and Plainfield. Linden right now is the number 14 seed in the power rankings, Plainfield number 13. So it's crucial. The winner is in, the loser not necessarily out, but if there's activity below them, whoever the loser is, if there's activity below them with Passaic, Northeastside, and Livingston win, they could be in trouble. So it's a must-win game, I would say, for both of them. Both teams have been playing very well too, so it's an exciting game from that perspective. Linden's won 3 in a row, and Plainfield's won 3 of its last 4. Now Plainfield lost last week to Somerville, 30-7, but Somerville's a ranked team. That's not necessarily an awful thing for Plainfield. That may be a game that really sharpens what the Cardinals need to do to beat Linden. Linden's been a different team the last 3 weeks since Cole Watkins stepped in at quarterback, giving Tyrone Hinton, who's done a fabulous job of playing quarterback early in the season, let him play his more natural running back position. And Plainfield's done a great job all season with Kamal Lowry at quarterback and Joel Cordoba, who's I think one of the better overall players in the Big Central as a receiver and a defensive back for Plainfield. So that's an outstanding game. And the other one is a team fighting for its way to get in. It's Livingston. They have not had a lot of success the last few years. They're right now seated number 17. So they're playing Montclair. They've got to win the game. If they beat Montclair, it's going to be at Woodman Field Saturday afternoon in Montclair, so not an easy thing for Livingston. It's always a tough place for a visitor to come to, play at Woodman Field. But Livingston's been playing very well lately. If they can win this game, they're in. Montclair's okay. Montclair's the 10th seed in the section, so win or lose, Montclair is going to be making the field. Could it possibly make the Mounties a little complacent, knowing that they're in? Doubtful, but, Livingston's got a lot to play for. So Noah Ramos at quarterback, he's done a fabulous job this year. John Marco Maiello has been an outstanding running back. And Abel Paul, a sophomore, has really come on as a surprising player for the Lancers, receiver and running back for Livingston. So Livingston's been playing well, and they got a big game Saturday. And it's not every year Livingston's got a big game at this time of the year.
Well, with big games come big performances, and our roundtable has done just that. But we just got the ball back again, and we're going in for the go-ahead score to win this one. So we're going to wrap around again with another look here, this time at the playoff outlook. What sections are shaping up to be the best? And I'll lean on you, Ryan Patty, to get this game-winning drive off and started. What section is really jumping out to you as we're nearing the start of the postseason?
I'm going to dive into North 2 here, Dan, and it's not about who's at the top of this section. We know Glen Rock, Westwood, and Berners are very solid teams, and this super section's about, the big picture, the teams at the bottom, the teams in the middle. You look at Rutherford. Rutherford's made a sectional title 3 years in a row, and here they are as the number 13 seed right now. Shabazz, they made the Group 1 semifinal last year, and they're number 15 right now. Both of these teams are 5-2, so they aren't necessarily bad teams. Maybe they're slightly lesser versions of what they were last year. But then you look at a Waldwick. They beat Rutherford this year, and they're number 12. Becton, 6-1. They lost in the NJIC semifinals last week to Butler by 2 touchdowns, and they're the number 8 seed. So they're only, a couple scores worse than one of the best Group 1 teams. Lyndhurst, they played Becton in week 0. They fumbled near the goal line and almost beat Becton. They're number 14 in the North 2 super section. Then you got Pequannock. They're 6th in the super section, and they have a head-to-head win over the 4th seed in Ramsey. And they lost to Madison. Pequannock did. Madison's 10th, and they blew out a Group 1 champion in reigning champion in Mountain Lakes. Hanover Park, the 5th seed. They have a head-to-head win over Pequannock, and you can't count out Caldwell. They're 9th, High Point 7th. And Newton's very good at 5-2 at number 11. So there's so much in this section. Anything could happen, and there's going to be surprises from next week all the way through November.
Luis Torres, what's the playoff section that's really standing out in your estimation?
Ryan touched on it a little bit earlier when he was breaking down kind of his game to watch. And I'm going to go back to North 3 here a little bit because we know the mainstays here, kind of like Ryan mentioned. Old Tappan won the Group 3 title 2 years ago, got to a sectional final last year. West Essex got to the Group 3 final last year. Pascagoula Valley kind of lost to West Morris. West Morris right now the 4 seed. West Morris has won 3 straight sectional titles, and again they're in great shape to make another deep postseason run. I touched on Mendham, but then you go down. I mean, you got Sparta, who's got a great passing attack, and Shane Hoover, the junior quarterback, who's actually committed to Seton Hall baseball, but he could definitely find his way in playing football at the next level. He's thrown for 24 touchdowns. I just saw them last week and kind of clinching at least a share of a division title and a win over West Milford in a game he threw for 5 touchdowns. Mountville has one of the most dynamic players in Morris County, and Anthony Feaster. And then you got teams like Passaic Valley, who have really solid years, and you kind of go to some big central teams, kind of Mike's area in Cranford and Summit. And then you have Wayne Hills, of course, kind of had a little bit of a resurgent year this year. And then arguably the best player in this section played at Snyder, and that's Rutgers command DJ McClary. So right now they're the 12th seed. I mean, you could just never overlook Snyder and kind of what they've been able to do kind of with DJ McClary back there. And then you also have kind of a team like maybe Weequahic. It's probably not the Weequahic of the last couple of years, but you just never know. I mean, they have athletes and they're coached up real well with Brian Logan there. So North 3, again, it's going to be competitive. It's going to be deep. Could see a couple of teams kind of pull off some upsets going on the road, like a Sparta did last year when they beat Hillside, or West Morris when they beat Old Tappan to win that sectional title. So North Group 3 has always been very good the last couple of years, and I expect it to be the same again.
Mike Kinney, for the playoff outlook, I know that you have been heaping a ton of praise on this specific grouping, and rightfully so. What is capturing your imagination here as we're leading into the postseason?
Yeah, no joke, Dan. I can't stop talking about this section. Honestly, I've been talking about it all year long because it's just so deep. It's just so filled with talent and tradition. When Phillipsburg and Westfield both went from North 5 this year with the new sections to Group 4, this went from being a very solid section to being an impossible section. It's just so loaded down. Here's just look at it this way. There's 2 undefeated top 20 teams in this section. Morris Knolls and Woodbridge, they're not the 1st or the 2nd seed right now. If things were bracketed today, they'd be 3 and 4. So that's how good it is. Number 1 right now is Phillipsburg at 6-1. Number 2 is Ridge at 6-1. The thing is, if it ended today, Ridge would be the number 1 team. Phillipsburg number 2, because Ridge gave Phillipsburg its only loss earlier in the season, so they'd be number 1, and then Peaburg would be 2, and then you'd have Morris Knolls at 3 with their Veer attack, rushing game that's compiled almost 2,300 yards this year. Nobody's been able to really stop them. Woodbridge undefeated with the Anderson twins, Brian and Derek tearing up fields in the Big Central. Then you got Northern Highlands, which is a team that's been beset by injuries, but they're still hanging tough at 5. Always a well-coached team, always a team that's well-prepared for the postseason. And even though Nate Johnson's not at quarterback anymore because he's injured, Jack O'Callahan's done a fantastic job. Then you've got Ramapo, another team that hasn't been the Ramapo that it's been. They're at number 6 right now, but they've won 4 straight games all of a sudden. Casey Grosser is showing he's a quarterback you've got to deal with. He's a smart guy. He's a talented guy. He's going to be trouble in the postseason. After that, you've got Wayne Valley, Chatham, Central, and at number 10, you've got Westfield. Westfield lost to Peaburg by a pretty big score earlier in the season, but Westfield, you're talking about a former Group 5 program, a team that's always well coached, a team that has very good players. At 10, I'd be very wary of playing a team like Westfield in the playoffs this year. And then after that, you've even got Randolph, Rahway 6-2, Mount Olive. The number 16 team in this section right now is a Colonia team that's 4-4 and dangerous. This section is absolutely loaded with talent. Can't wait to see some of it.
Well, we've gotten the flavor of what the North postseason will look like. Now we're shifting down to the south part of New Jersey. And Kevin Minnick, what is capturing your attention right now for a playoff outlook?
Well, Dan, my focus is on the South 4, and it's a section we talked about in the preseason. We talked about midway through, and now as we begin the stretch run, here they are again. No disrespect to the other teams in this section, like a Central that's 8-0, or a Middle North that's 6-0, and even Brick Memorial sitting at number 3 in the power rankings right now. But, at the beginning of the season, I clearly believed Millville and Winslow were the top 2 teams, and they have answered the bell all season long. Millville right now sits at the 1. Winslow sits at the 2. If it were to end today, they'd flip-flop because Winslow has handed Millville its lone defeat this season. But, these are 2 teams that have just played sensational football all season long. And, they're top 5. Winslow right now at number 5 in the state, Millville at number 7. I know it's high school football, and I know that we're dealing with kids, and really, anything can happen from week to week. But these 2 teams have pretty much been extremely consistent throughout the fall, and they're on a collision course. I think this is a state semifinal just waiting to happen. It's just a matter of a couple of more games to wait. Winslow can take care of the WJFL American this weekend with a win over Cherokee. Millville has itself a game against a St. Augustine team right now that's, has lost a little bit of its luster, but will still be a formidable test for them. But, I think both teams get through the weekend fine, and then the playoffs start. And then now we're what we've been thinking about all season, what we've been it's been kind of been on the tip of our tongue all year long. Are these two teams, and will they square off in a state semifinal? And Winslow had the best of Millville during the regular season, and right now owns the bragging rights. But once the tournament starts, all that stuff is got to go out the window, and you can't have the jawing back and forth. You can't have there are no bragging rights anymore. When the tournament starts, everybody's fresh and the slate is clean. But these 2 teams have been just so dominant all year long, athletes on both sides of the ball, that if these 2 teams do not get to the state semifinal, it'll be a disappointing season for one of the 2 of them, or potentially both.
Bill Evans, down south, what section are you excited to look at?
I'm looking at South 5, and I just talked a little bit earlier about Cherry Hill East and where they might fall, and that'll be an interesting matchup, whoever they get in the first round. But you look at the top of South 5, and you got Toms River North. They're the 2-time defending state champion. They're in our I think top 6 in the state. They're undefeated again. But let's remind everybody how the playoff system works. This is a 16-team South Group 5 bracket that's going to be broken up into 2 subsections. So where do you want to be on the bracket that doesn't have Toms River North? And whoever ends up on that side is going to also going to have probably a better chance now to win a sectional title, because they'll break it up into South and Central. Toms River North will end up the top seed, I guess, on the Central side, and then whoever's on the other side is going to be contending for a Group 5 title, be it South or Central, however they break it down. Right now Cherokee and Kingsway are the 8-9. That'd be a great first round matchup. I'm sure either one of them would prefer to be 7 or even 10. That would get them on the other side. You go to the top of the bracket. Right now, Washington Township's 2, Atlantic City's 3, Rancocas Valley's 4. Rancocas Valley has a win over Washington Township, so if they end up back-to-back, Rancocas Valley will jump Washington Township, but only if they end up back-to-back. Otherwise, RV, if they still end up 4 with Atlantic City in between them and Washington Township, they're going to have to go on the road to Toms River North for a sectional final if they make it that far. Washington Township is 2. They play at Timber Creek this week, which should get them a couple of power points. Interestingly enough, Atlantic City is 3. They do not play this week. They have a bye, and maybe this is kind of a bigger story for another day. They're one of the only teams in the state that still play on Thanksgiving Day. They play Holy Spirit in a game that's kind of going on for most of the last century. If that game was this weekend, that would give Atlantic City a lot of power points. That would also give Holy Spirit, who now after they canceled their November 1st game against St. Joe's Hamilton this week, is now off until the playoffs. That would give them a chance to get a win that when we see the non-publics in a week, maybe would have put them up around that number 2 seed. But it's not happening. It's happening on Thanksgiving, which is a reason that a lot of teams move their Thanksgiving Day games to the regular season, because that gives them a chance to get some power points building up. So it'll be interesting to see who ends up 2, who ends up 3, who ends up 4. If RV can get enough out of a win over Lenape, potential win over Lenape this week, to vault Atlantic City, which would then allow them to jump all the way up to number 2 and be home for the entire sectional playoff, or whether it ends up Washington Township, Atlantic City, which was a first round playoff game last year, with they ended up 2-3, and then how everything else filters down from there. But South 5 is going to be very interesting. Certainly Toms River North is going to be the heavy favorite on their section, but who's going to end up on the other side? And that's what I'm going to really be interested to see this week.
Well, we're trying to close off this long drive here of this roundtable discussion with the playoffs. We're at the goal line. We're giving it to our main man, Joe Zadalis. And Joe, what is the playoff section that is jumping out to you as we're getting ready to turn the page onto the postseason?
Well, for me and for most of the short conference, it's South 2. Normally, I would say this is a highly competitive section with 9 of the top 10 teams with either 6 or 7 wins. In fact, in this section, Spotswood is 7-1, is number 16. But in this section, to me, Dan, it comes down to the top 4. Don't expect there to be a lot of movement this week. Rumson-Fair, which has been to the last 2 Group 2 finals, is number 1 at 7-0. They play Colts Neck this week. Colts Neck is winless. Camden at 6-2 is number 2. Camden has won 3 of its last 4. However, it is idle until the playoffs. It plays Camden East Side in a Thanksgiving Day rivalry game. So Camden is not going to move. 3, surprisingly to me, is Wall. Wall is 6-1, one of the really terrific comeback stories in the short conference. Wall was decimated by a hazing scandal 3 years ago. They brought in longtime Manalapan coach Eddie Guerreri, who has restored stability and discipline to that program, and Wall sits number 3. And then number 4 is probably the most dangerous team in the bracket, Point Pleasant Borough, which is on a tear. They've won 5 of their last 6. The only loss was 24-21 to Toms River North. Point Borough plays at Howell this week. And again, I think in the short conference, we would all like to see a Point Borough Rumson final, which would be a rematch of the season opener. In that season opener, Rumson had a 28-7 lead at the half and hung on for a 41-28 win. And I've been told by people who understand the PowerPoints formula more than I do, it would take a mathematical miracle for Point Borough to jump Wall and get into the 3, thus avoiding Rumson in the first round. But the Point Borough Rumson rematch would be in the semifinal, would be a phenomenal game. Point Borough started a first-time quarterback in that game, and he really got his feet wet, and he has come on so much. Jay Clayton, 3-sport star at Point Borough, tremendous baseball player, on the podium in Atlantic City as a wrestler, and he's matured. And Point Pleasant Borough has started, to figure things out. They won a big game at Brick Memorial recently. Like I said, Dan, I think it's a great game. I think Camden has too much athleticism for Wall, but Wall has proved us wrong all season, and that's why I have my eye on South 2 in the state tournament.
So after taking a look at what is about to be on the horizon during this playoff cutoff week, as well as taking a sneak peek at some of the sections that are on the horizon, there is a championship to be played this week, and that's for the NJIC title, and it's a featured matchup of Butler taking on Glen Rock. And we'll bring in here Ryan Patty to talk about what you're looking forward to in this matchup of Butler versus Glen Rock.
Yeah, my biggest question for Butler, Dan, is can they contain Nick Atme? Are they up for the test of it? And I think they are. And I think we're going to see a little more defense in this game than one would think, because when two really good teams meet, both defenses kind of rise to the occasion, even if, the offense is, the vice versa, the opponent's offense is looking pretty good. I think both defenses are going to show up. But for Butler, this is a different matchup than preparing for John Palsy and Becton's offense, because Becton's a little bit more run heavy and ball control than Glen Rock is. Glen Rock throws the ball a little bit more. They run slightly more plays than Becton has over the season. So if you're Butler, you're preparing for maybe a little slightly faster of a pace than what you did, for Becton. But Butler might be without senior Matt Borelli at linebacker. It's a big loss for them. He got hurt on the opening kickoff in last week's game against Becton, and he's also a valuable running back for them. So that hurts, but this defense is relentless for the Bulldogs. They have 13 interceptions, 3 of them for pick sixes, 29 tackles for loss. I mean, this unit is kind of just nonstop. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to there.
Luis Torres, what can Glen Rock do to bottle up the big play ability of Butler?
I think one thing that kind of stands out about Butler, and I know Glen Rock's going to have to prepare for, is Butler's been able to be balanced, both passing the ball and running the ball. I think they've thrown for just over 1,000 yards, and they've rushed for 1,200 yards, kind of showing that balance. And I think also they haven't been in a ton of close games, so I think their ones are going to be really fresh going into this game as well. I mean, Glen Rock's going to have to play really well, and I think that defensive line that they have is kind of up to the task. I mean, they got Pete Lageman, who's committed to Bucknell. I touched on him, kind of his ability, kind of on both sides of the ball, at left tackle and kind of as a defensive lineman at tackle. And Adrian Galvez is another defensive lineman and two-way lineman who's kind of had also a really good season. So one thing that kind of stood out with the game against St. Mary's in the semifinals that Glen Rock won is they got 2 pick sixes. They scored 50 points and 14 of them came on offense. So that Glen Rock's defense kind of showed that they have the ability to kind of get stops and kind of create those turnovers and kind of return and be opportunistic on that side of the ball and create some points. I think that's going to be important against a really good and sound Butler team. Glen Rock is going to have to play complementary football here on Friday night, kind of come away with an NJIC title. And I think that defensive line and their offensive line is going to be a key factor in it.
Well, guys, it's prediction time. Who do you have taking down the NJIC championship this year in 2024? Luis, what's your pick?
I think me and Ryan kind of both agree that Butler has kind of been the top team in the NJIC kind of heading into the year, and they kind of proven that. But the job that Cal McCord at Glen Rock has kind of done this year has kind of been really impressive. And what they were able to do last week kind of against St. Mary's, a bigger St. Mary's team who's got one of the arguably has the biggest line in the NJIC and kind of some dynamic weapons, kind of in Nasir Owens, Brad Higgins, Kazir White. I think with them scoring 50 points and Nick Atme the way he's been playing all year, I'm going to take Glen Rock on Friday night, kind of lift the NJIC trophy in a really good game and a close game over Butler.
Ryan, what's your pick for the game?
I'm going the other way, guys. I'm going with Butler. And I want to start by saying I think I speak for the both of us when I say the best 2 teams in the conference have made it to the conference final. There's no question about it, in my opinion. And what's special is that either winner gets to say they're NJIC champs for the first time. And you look at what both teams did in their respective semifinal, and you have to be impressed. Both teams are hunting the top seed in their respective super section as well. Which, in other words, is the winner has their chance at home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Butler is going to need some help. They need Boone to somehow beat, that amazing Cedar Grove team there. That's a top North 1. And, a win from Glen Rock would probably give them the top spot in North 2. I don't think Westwood's got enough ammo to leapfrog them. But like I said, I'm going with Butler. I think this team's got some serious moxie. A lot of those same kids, were on the team on last year's North 2 Group 1 runner-up team, and that winning identity is kind of what matters this time of year. So give me the Bulldogs in a very, very fun game.
So a split decision between our two writers there deciding who's going to win the NJIC. And we also have a couple of big non-public showdowns here that could have a big factor when it comes to playoff seeding in a couple of weeks' time. Taking a look at a great rivalry game in Bergen County. Bergen Catholic taking on St. Joseph Regional. And for St. Joe's, they are dealing with some major injuries and concerns for some of their playmakers. Luis, what's going on in Green Knight country?
Seems like quarterback Lamar Best is going to be out for an extended period of time. I mean, he was off having the Willingboro transfer. He's an all-state quarterback last year. Was having a brilliant season, kind of both throwing and running, kind of doing everything kind of Augie Hoffman kind of wanted them to do. But he sustained an injury in the first quarter after he rushed for a touchdown against Pope John. And kind of you see the video. I went back and went back and looked at the broadcast. Immediately you saw his arm go limp. It looks like it could be a upper arm collarbone type of injury for him. So it looks like he's going to miss an extended period of time, which is a big blow to Joe's. But in steps in Mason Geis, who's kind of been he's a transfer from Immaculata, and in the preseason, kind of throughout the season, they both him and Lamar Best have been kind of splitting reps. So I think Mason's going to be ready for this matchup here on Saturday against Bergen Catholic. I mean, he probably isn't as dynamic. He's definitely not as dynamic with his legs as Lamar Best is, but he's kind of more of a prototypical passer, but he can definitely move around a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how the offense kind of changes with the play calling heading into the Bergen Catholic game. But I think Geis is going to be ready for the opportunity that's now presented to him.
Ryan, what does Bergen Catholic have to do to extend its in-state win streak to 22 in a row and pretty much lock up the number one seed in non-public A?
For me, Dan, they have to start fast, and I believe I'm not the only one who thinks that needs to happen. I think they put themselves in a good position to win this game if they can assert themselves early, whether they start on defense and they get a 3-and-out or a turnover, or their offense is on the field first and, they go on a long drive, or maybe even the special teams kind of breaks it open with a kickoff return. So, in these rivalry games, throwing the first punch is very important in my opinion, because it's instant adversity to the team that you throw that punch to. So I'd say that since the bye week or even the Pope John game, Bergen hasn't been firing on all cylinders in the first half. It's been, a couple good first halves, but not phenomenal. And I think that's kind of what Vito's looking for. Even, that Paramus Catholic game, they were up 27-0 at halftime, and he gave his kids an earful because he wants them capitalizing on every single opportunity that they have. And they missed a couple in that first half despite the big lead. But to me, the fast start for Bergen's important. If they can do that, they put themselves in a very good spot.
The other game to watch, DePaul Catholic, number 2 in our NJ.com top 20, taking on Delbarton for a league championship in the Super Football Conference's United White Division. What does the DePaul defense need to do to prevent this from becoming a shootout, Ryan, as both teams come in with really high-powered offenses?
Well, to me, DePaul's doing a very good job on defense, at creating turnovers and cracking down in the red zone. I think both things are very important in this game. The red area has been a small area of concern for Delbarton, as we highlighted earlier on. They had some drives fizzle out, this past week against Bergen, and they ran into some miscues against Pope John when they were in plus territory. So, turnovers are very important here for DePaul, and that's kind of been their story. I mean, they have 13 takeaways this year, 2 block kicks. So, they're creating extra opportunities for their offense. And when they're doing that, that's huge, because we know how explosive this offense is. Whenever they touch the ball, they're a threat to score from anywhere. So more opportunities for the offense is typically more points, and obviously points win you games.
Luis, last season, Delbarton was dominant in their win at home against DePaul Catholic. But this season, they've had their ups and downs. What does Delbarton need to do to improve upon to pull off this upset and claim another league championship?
They're going to have to execute in all 3 phases. I know I touched on it earlier, kind of recapping that game against Bergen, and Ryan just did as well. I mean, you have to capitalize on your opportunities kind of once you get into the red zone. I mean, you didn't do that against Bergen Catholic, and kind of cost you down the road to kind of there in the second half. And also establishing the run game. I know Ryan Trafford and the offensive line, some major pieces kind of graduated from last year's team, but Brock Dandridge is more than capable at running back, and the offensive line is still pretty good with Andy Cavello and Peter Danini and kind of the rest of those guys there at Delbarton. So establishing the run and kind of controlling the clock is going to be vastly important, because DePaul's offense, just look at the weapons. We've touched on, they probably have the best skill in the state, kind of with Derek Zammit, Nolan James Jr., and then the receivers like Desi Jones and Elijah Burris. So Delbarton, going back also defensively, they're going to have to find a way to pressure Zaman. I mean, guys like Tyler Jackson, Luca Lopez, and linebacker Kyle Checchio, they're going to have to get after the quarterback, get after Zaman, kind of win those battles kind of there in the front seven to kind of help that secondary out. So for Delbarton, I mean, last year, if you remember, the weather wasn't great. It was a very windy day there, Dan, if you remember. And DePaul really couldn't get their passing game going because you essentially couldn't throw the ball going against the wind because it was just getting knocked down. So for Delbarton, I mean, you're going to have to establish the run and kind of get things going and kind of control the clock and get Phil Fulmar going with some passes from Jay to Princeton Valley. I mean, Delbarton was able to move the ball a little bit on Bergen Catholic, especially there in the first half, kind of hitting some big plays. But it's going to the DePaul defensively, they're going to have to do some things differently and kind of get some of those things fixed to kind of keep the DePaul's explosive plays limited and contained.
Those are going to be a pair of great non-public matchups that might very well decide the top seeds in non-public A and B after this weekend. Reminder, fans, that from the opening kickoff to the end of the season, NJ.com's award-winning staff of reporters and photojournalists put you in the middle of the action for in-depth coverage of all the football games around New Jersey, including photo galleries, recaps, and stats. Visit NJ.com/HS Sports. And we have a pair of outstanding rivalry games for our NJ.com broadcast this week. We invite you to join me on Friday night in Franklin Lakes for another chapter of Northern Highlands versus Ramapo in what very well, again, might be just the appetizer for the main course in the North Group 4 playoffs. That's going to be a 6:30 p.m. kickoff on Friday, and then we will head over to Montvale in Bergen County on Saturday afternoon for another chapter of Bergen Catholic St. Joseph Regional as those two longtime parochial powers clash in a game that really might be a preview of a potential state championship game down the line as well in non-public A. Kickoff on Saturday is at 1 p.m., and you can watch all the games live and on demand on NJ.com/watch if you're an NJ.com subscriber. So that'll do it for this long marathon session of the Jersey Blitz, getting you ready for the postseason, which is just around the corner. I'd like to thank my cohorts, Luis Torres, Ryan Patty, Mike Kinney, Kevin Minnick, Bill Evans, Joe Zadalis, and our engineer, Brian Dekine, for all of their help in getting this football past the goal line and in for another winning show. So for everybody here at NJ.com, I'm Dan Long saying so long and thanks for joining us here on the Jersey Blitz. We'll see you next week.